Okay, folks, myself and Brad are back again, and we're going to talk about working through comparison syndrome when you are trying to get fitness results. This is something that we see come up a lot in the program with our clients, and there's it's a double-sided issue where you have a really strong online community, which we've developed now. And people are sharing a lot of wins, which is fantastic. It's super motivating. But then sometimes if you're having a bad week, it can kind of backfire, and it's easy to start comparing yourself. Like, why am I not losing weight? Why am I not able to do this cool stuff that this person has shared? Am I in some way deficient? So, Brad, do you want to maybe share a bit about this? I think we can kind of talk about our own experiences with this as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, obviously it's something we see through our community, but it happens to all of us nearly constantly. Social media, even without social media, I mean, the whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses, that old expression of feeling you need to be on the same level as those around you. And obviously things have just been exacerbated so severely now because of the internet, whereas you used to just be able to compare yourself to a few people at work and maybe those people on your street or sort of slightly broader community, whereas now it's billions of complete strangers. I mean, I remember thinking, why can't I do a handstand push-up, because nearly everyone I follow on Instagram can do a handstand push-up. And you think, well, am I deficient in some way? Absolutely, you think like that. But so I've just stopped following them, and some of that is one solution, is to just avoid it for sure. But I guess the other thing is trying to bring a more rational thought approach to it. Why are you responding like this? And to break it down, you don't know how long these people have been training. You don't know what other responsibilities they have in their lives. Comparing yourself to people that you don't have full disclosure of their lifestyles, it's just like a losing game. And even if you did know everything about them, it'd still be a losing game, because you are unique, Connor. You are a twinkling,
I'm a snowflake. Yeah, for sure, man. And it's like, it's very easy to go into Instagram and be like, man, I don't have like 3% body fat and I'm making $1 million a year, so there's something wrong with me, because that's like normal now, right? But yeah, it's very easy. Like, you're looking at the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, and even most of that is not really real. I think a really important thing as well, like me and Brad were just talking beforehand, as a coach in particular, like body weight training and skills, it's very easy to be like, oh God, like this guy can do this thing and I can't, and like I want to be able to do this thing. And I remember when I was living in Melbourne, that was when I really started getting to know a lot of people in like the movement culture space. And the more I talked to these people, I was like, how often do you train, mate? Do you know what the most common like daily amount was for a lot of the people I talked to?
Do you want me to guess?
Yeah.
I can guess. I would say upwards of 2.5 hours, maybe less than 5.
Yeah.
6 hours.
4 hours for a lot
Right.
of people. And then like talking to people like, right, myself and Ryan were talking about this on the podcast as well. He was training like 6 hours, a day, we're talking. And then I was at a workshop 2 weekends ago with a guy called Stefan Kranick, incredible, like unbelievable mover, can do everything. And I was talking to him, I was like, what's your training like? And he goes, well, yeah, I'm doing pulled it back to about 6 hours recently. But I mean, I was doing 8 to 12 there for quite a few years. And I was like, so when you see people moving incredibly well, it's because they've invested, like think about like a 40-hour work week. That's what they're doing with their training. And I think a lot of times when we compare ourselves to people, we don't understand how much time they've invested in the thing that we think that we should be doing now as well, even though we've done maybe 1/10 of the time that they've put into it. And a lot of times this is 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours, 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week for decades. So that's the standard that you're looking at. And a lot of these people will also have been childhood gymnasts, you know, doing martial arts since they're kids, doing Olympic lifting since they're kids. So there's a lot of developmental patterns that happen when you're a child, like ligament and tendon development. It's completely different to starting these activities as an adult. Your injury risk is much lower if you've developed all this as a child as well.
I think to add to that as well is we don't tend to, well, speaking to my friend about this recently, we don't tend to think in terms of sacrifices. And we look at someone, you know, we look at someone who's a professional ballerina, for instance, and you think, oh, wow, that would have been amazing to be able to do that, to move your body the way she does. But the sacrifices that person's made to get to that position, you know, very, very unlikely had pizza Fridays with friends. Very unlikely enjoyed a pint or two. You know, there are huge ramifications or limitations or sacrifices that person's made, and makes you think, well, you know, what's the trade-off? Is it okay? I guess it comes back to that thing we often speak about, like what's enough, you know? Isn't it just enough that you can tie your shoes as you age, or stand on one leg and not feel like you're going to fall over and be able to lift something overhead without pain? Yeah, and you still get to enjoy all the other things in life, like sometimes lying on the couch watching a movie, eating a pizza, and not stressing about it.
Yeah, and well, I think it's also just like it's dependent on, you know, what do you want. So like if you're like, hey, I want to move this well, or I want to get into like professional dancing, so let's just use ballet as an example. I knew quite a few people who did like high level ballet in Melbourne. They all had issues with eating, and some of them were actually quite heavy now as a result of that, because it backfired, because there was such an emphasis on how you look. So there's definitely going to be a cost if you want to go up the ladder of these types of activities. But then if you're still wanting to be like, hey, look, I want to move incredibly well, or I want to get to the top level of business or whatever, it's like, well, okay, but this is what it takes. So just being aware of that as well. Like, look, if you're willing to invest 4 to 12 hours a day in the thing, and you just understand that that's what it's going to take, then I think that's okay. But there's nothing worse than being like, you know, doing a half an hour or an hour and just being kind of frustrated, or thinking that you're defunct in some way, that you're not crushing it like these people who are doing 10 times as much volume as you. So I think that's just the important thing. As long as you kind of know, okay, this is the cost of, like, Precision Nutrition have a really good article called The Cost of Getting Lean. And it just tells you, like, basically to get to from like 25 or 20% body fat down to 15, it's, you know, it's pretty manageable for a lot of people. And then to get from 15 to 10%, it's harder, but it's still doable for people who have, you know, like regular lives. But then to get from 10 to like 8 or 7 or 6, now it becomes like exponentially harder. So now you're looking at like, okay, is it really worth the trade-off to go from like 10% body fat to 8% body fat? Because it's going to be at least twice as difficult as it was to go from, or maybe 3 or 4 times as difficult as it was to go from 20 to 15%. So it's just understanding like what sacrifices, like you were saying, Brad, like what sacrifices are you willing to make to get to this goal or result? And once you're aware of what they're going to be and how much time and effort it takes, I think that's just the most important thing, to just understand that. Because I think a lot of the times in fitness, we can think, oh, it shouldn't be this hard, or it shouldn't take this long for me, so I must be doing something wrong. But normally it's actually a volume and time investment standpoint issue that's happening here.
Yeah, I don't want to belittle anyone's goals, because obviously everyone's entitled to their own focus points and goals. But it's incredible our obsession with body fat percentage in our, at least sort of in my echo chamber. It's crazy, you know, to be so fixated on this thing. And I frequently come across videos of people saying how they did get to that level, and in many ways, you know, it's what you're saying, it wasn't really worth it. The sleep suffered, their libido suffered, their mood suffered. It's like you're super cranky, you're super agitated, you can't sleep, and you can't have sex, but at least you got abs popping through your shirt. It's
All signs of health right there. All of
yeah,
those
it's just
things. Yeah.
crazy obsession we have. I blame society, Connor. I blame society.
So let's talk about maybe some strategies, because it is a common thing. Or like, I'm in a business mentoring program as well, and I work for online trainer mentorship, which we help coaches move online with their fitness businesses. And I can get caught in that trap as well, seeing other coaches are like, oh, I've made, X amount of money each week or each month. So it's easy to kind of fall into that trap if you're trying to compare things directly. So do you have any advice for people who are maybe they're struggling, they're in a program, or they're just from social media and they're looking and they're like, oh, why am I not getting things as quickly or getting as good results?
That's what happens every time I chat with you, Connor. I'm like, why is Connor so ahead of me in this game? It turns out because you've been doing it a lot longer,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you're handsome, so that helps. But no, I'd say the best advice that I heard, and I can't remember where it came from, but was just probably Ryan Hurst, because that's usually
Normally
where,
it's Ryan.
yeah. And the best point of comparison is you previously, so whatever it may be. So maybe you started training 3 months ago and you're looking at someone in your community or at your gym or online, and you're going, why am I not there? But it's much better to just go, okay, where was I 3 months ago? And that shift might be very, very small. But if you look at it as objectively as possible, and you look at it like rationally, you'll see that you've made improvements. And surely that's the point that you can control, one, but also the point that really matters, because it's you making these improvements that no one really cares about. I mean, obviously, people close to you care about your health improvements if you're unwell and you manage to get healthy. But being able to do a muscle up or 15 pull-ups or dropping to a certain weight, no one really cares besides you, and your coach usually.
Do
But
it.
yeah, so it's like, just use yourself as your metric, your former self as your metric. And when you're feeling down on yourself, look back to where you were, 3, 6, 9, 12, however many months ago, that will inspire you. I mean, I can, for my own experience, like, I really like the idea of high level calisthenics skills. But I mean, if I'm honest, I don't train that like specifically, because I'm also someone who likes variety, and I like to go, oh, this is interesting to try, and I'll stick with something for 3 or 4 months and then move to something else. And then maybe, by the time I get back to that skill I was working on, a good chunk of time's passed. But then I think, like, why can't I front lever yet? But actually, when I think back, I remember getting into calisthenics through a friend of mine. I was visiting him in Berlin, and we went to a park, and I did pull-ups. Well, I tried, and like, it was really embarrassing, because I obviously didn't know the correct form, wasn't strong enough to do it, and it just had insane amount of pain in my upper trapezius, in my neck, for days, that I had to take like paracetamol. And I was just so ashamed and embarrassed. And now I look back at it and laugh, because now I can do one pull-up. No, I can do a few. And you think, well, that's progress. It's like something that you literally could not do, and now you can do.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think it's just super important. Like, compare yourself to where you were before. And yeah, Ryan talks about this, and then Dan John. So Ryan and Dan John are the two most quoted people on the podcast. So Dan John talks about also, like, if you played sports as a child, that's something that you need to factor in as well, because it's kind of like if you did a language as a child, you did Spanish in school, then you didn't do it for 10 or 15 years, then you restart it as an adult, you'll pick it up a lot quicker. And it's similar, like if you were into sports as a child, just the routines that you built there, they're going to be easier to rebuild if they were there as a child, as an adult, versus having never done anything as a child. So that's an important thing to factor in as well. Am I comparing myself to someone who has all of these extra steps ahead already if we're both starting from scratch at 40? Because that's a big thing to think about as well. And then just as you were talking there as well, Brad, just it kind of reminds me of like people wanting to get famous or this type of stuff, and the Jim Carrey quote, like, you know, I wish more people knew what it would be like to be famous, because then they wouldn't be chasing it. And it's kind of the same as like, once I get to this body fat percentage or I can achieve this skill, then I'll be happy. And it's a dangerous way to be playing, because you'll realize whenever you get to the place that you're at, it's not going to actually give you happiness. So you're going to be pretty pissed off like after all of the sacrifice. So it's just a case of, you know, focusing on the present and what you can do now and still work towards stuff. I think it's really important to, you know, have more confidence in yourself and your abilities to do stuff, and you achieve that through confidence, but don't link that to 100% of your happiness. Otherwise you're never going to be very happy or content with anything. So yeah, I'm glad we kind of touched on that, mate. Anything else you want to talk about with the comparison stuff?
Don't do it. No, that's about as much as I'd say. Yeah, I mean, it's an easy trap to fall into, and you know, you there's so many different points to do it from. So I guess the other thing is just bringing an attitude of awareness to that. You know, it's like if you're doing it, it doesn't make you bad or failing at life. It just makes it almost inevitable, and you have to really work hard at shutting out those influences or trying to understand them better.
Yeah, I think that's actually, you said that earlier as well. Something Josh Hillis said as well when I interviewed him a few months back, that he just audits his social media feed. If he sees someone and he follows them and he feels bad after looking at their content, he just deletes them and he unfollows them. So that's like a nice little thing that you can do as well. Create your feed so you are following people that make you feel inspired versus like a worthless, you know, whatever. All right.